The golden hues of dusk had faded into deep purple as the last light of day slipped behind the houses of Oakbrook, casting long shadows over the quiet suburb. Rusty, a golden retriever with a weathered face and a coat that had lost its youthful sheen, ambled down the sidewalk. His paws pressed softly against the cold pavement, his nose twitching at the scents carried on the evening breeze. Once he had known the warmth of a home, but now he wandered the streets, astray by circumstance but beloved by the neighborhood. As he turned down Maple Street, he spotted Mrs. Abney, an elderly widow who left a small bowl of kibble on her porch each evening. She watched him with her usual smile, her eyes soft with understanding. "There you are, you old charmer," she called out. Rusty trotted over, his tail wagging as he lapped up the water she left for him. She leaned down, her thin hand stroking his graying fur. "You stay safe tonight, you hear? Something's in the air." With a soft bark, Rusty nudged her hand in farewell and turned back down the street. But as he left, a strange sound cut through the silence. A high-pitched cry, almost like a mewling kitten, but heavier somehow. Rusty froze, his ears swiveling as he listened. He hadn't heard anything like it before. His curiosity piqued. Rusty padded toward the source of the sound, his heart quickening as he followed it into the empty community park. His nose led him to a row of trash cans near the playground. The cry grew louder, more insistent, tugging at some deep, protective part of him. He reared up on his hind legs, sniffing around the last can, and there, lying amidst crumpled papers and broken plastic, was a tiny bundle, a baby, abandoned and alone. For a moment, Rusty stared, his mind struggling to process the small, helpless form before him. But instinct took over. With careful, measured movements, he grasped the edge of the blanket with his teeth, lifting the baby from the trash. Its cries softened as it nestled against his warm fur. Rusty's heart raced, an unfamiliar urgency filling his chest. He trotted back toward the neighborhood, his steps quick and deliberate. Margaret Thorne's house came to mind. Margaret, the kind retired nurse who often set out food for the neighborhood strays, lived only a few blocks away. Rusty's memory clung to her warm voice, the gentle way she treated animals, as if each one were precious. As he approached her street, headlights from a car washed over him. He froze as a teenage boy on a bike nearly skidded to a stop, his mouth dropping open as he took in the sight. "Whoa, is that a dog carrying a baby?" The boy whipped out his phone, snapping a quick photo as Rusty continued down the road. Unfazed by the commotion, Rusty pressed on, his steps never faltering as he reached Margaret's porch. With a soft whimper, he placed the baby carefully on her welcome mat and let out a bark, sharp and insistent. Inside, Margaret sat in her armchair, flipping through an old novel with a contented smile. The bark startled her, cutting through her peaceful evening. She frowned, setting her book down. That bark was familiar, Rusty's, she was certain. But why so urgent? She opened the door, her breath catching as she took in the scene on her doorstep. A baby lay bundled up, tiny fists curled tight, its face red from crying. Rusty stood over it, his gaze shifting between the baby and Margaret, as if pleading for her help. "Oh, my heavens!" Margaret gasped, her hand pressing against her heart. She dropped to her knees, carefully scooping up the infant. "Rusty, where did you find this little one?" Rusty gave a soft whine, pressing close to her as she assessed the baby's condition, her nurse's training kicking in automatically. The baby's skin was cold, its cries weakening. She wrapped it in her own shawl, cradling it close to her chest as she dialed 911. "Yes, this is Margaret Thorne, 1542 Sycamore Street. I have a newborn infant here, possibly suffering from hypothermia. I need an ambulance right away." She glanced down at Rusty, her voice softening as she spoke to him. "You did something wonderful tonight, Rusty. You saved this child's life." Rusty watched her intently, his gaze never straying from the baby, even as the distant sound of sirens grew louder. Moments later, the ambulance pulled up and two paramedics climbed out, their expressions shifting to surprise as they took in the unusual scene on Margaret's porch. The younger paramedic, Aisha, knelt beside Margaret, her eyes wide. Did that dog bring this baby to you?" Margaret nodded, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I have no idea how, but he did. The older paramedic, Frank, shook his head in awe. I've seen a lot in my time, but that dog deserves a medal. As they prepared the baby for transport, Margaret felt a pang of reluctance. Do you think I could come along? I'm a retired NICU nurse. I'd like to help if I can. The paramedics exchanged glances before nodding. We could use an extra hand, Aisha said with a smile. Margaret turned to Rusty, hesitating, but his eyes met hers, filled with a quiet determination. You want to come too, don't you, Rusty? She asked, resting a hand on his head. The paramedics glanced at each other, but Frank shrugged with a small smile. Tonight, I think we can make an exception. And so, Margaret climbed into the ambulance with the baby in her arms, Rusty settling himself beside her. As the ambulance sped down the quiet streets, Margaret looked down at the dog who had just defied all expectations. You really are a hero, aren't you? She whispered, scratching behind his ears. As they reached the hospital, they were greeted by nurses and doctors who stared in astonishment at the sight of Margaret carrying the baby and Rusty loyally at her side. Dr. Liam Reeves, Margaret's old colleague from her nursing days, approached, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of her with the infant. Margaret, he asked, disbelief etched in his expression. Is that? She nodded, holding the baby close. I know it sounds impossible, Liam, but Rusty here found this child. He brought her to me. Dr. Reeves looked at the dog with newfound respect, reaching down to pet him. Well, looks like we have a real hero on our hands. Let's get this baby checked out. As the baby was whisked away into the NICU, Margaret and Rusty waited in the lobby, the weight of the night's events pressing down on her. She stroked Rusty's head, her heart pounding with worry for the infant's fate. A sharp voice broke the silence. Excuse me, ma'am. Margaret looked up to see a man in a crisp suit standing over her, his expression stern. I'm Gerald Hawkins from Animal Control, he announced, glancing disapprovingly at Rusty. This dog has caused quite a scene. I'm here to take him to the shelter. Margaret's heart raced as she rose to her feet. You can't do that. This dog just saved a baby's life. He deserves to stay. Hawkins's mouth twisted in a tight smile. Rules are rules. Stray dogs are a health risk, especially in a hospital. Before Margaret could respond, Dr. Reeves appeared, stepping between her and Hawkins. This dog is no ordinary stray, he said, his tone firm. I'll personally vouch for him. He stays with us. Hawkins hesitated, looking from Margaret to Dr. Reeves, but he finally relented with a begrudging nod. Fine, but I'll be watching. Margaret sighed in relief, crouching down to give Rusty a reassuring pat. You're staying with us, boy. Don't you worry. The hours ticked by in anxious silence as Margaret waited. Just as dawn broke, Detective Mei Chun strode into the hospital lobby, her sharp gaze landing on Margaret and Rusty. Mrs. Thorne, I've heard quite a story tonight, she began, crossing her arms. A stray dog finds an abandoned baby and brings her to safety? That's one for the books. Margaret offered a small smile. Rusty's special, Detective. I'm just glad he found her in time. Detective Chin nodded, glancing thoughtfully at Rusty. I'll need to speak with you more about this, and I'll be doing my best to track down the baby's family. But for now, she leaned down, offering Rusty a scratch behind his ears. You're a real hero, aren't you? Rusty's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes bright with gratitude as he leaned into her touch. Margaret watched the exchange, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the uncertainty. As the first light of morning streamed through the hospital windows, Margaret looked down at Rusty, a smile breaking through her worry. I think our lives just changed, didn't they, old boy? The hospital's waiting room grew silent as the last remnants of night slipped away, replaced by the early morning hum of nurses and doctors starting their shifts. Margaret sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the closed NICU doors. Rusty lay curled at her feet, his body still but his eyes watchful. Neither of them could rest, their concern for the tiny baby lingering like a shadow in the sterile hospital air. After what felt like hours, Dr. Liam Reeves stepped out of the NICU, a weary but hopeful look in his eyes. Margaret rose immediately, her heart pounding as she searched his face for any sign of news. She's stabilized, Dr. Reeves said, a soft smile breaking through his fatigue. But the next step will be tricky. The baby has a rare heart condition, tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia. She'll need a complex surgery to survive. Margaret's heart ached as she processed his words. Oh, Liam, is there anyone here who can handle it? Dr. Reeves took a deep breath. I'm prepared to perform it myself. It's a delicate procedure, but I've done it before, years ago. Margaret rested a reassuring hand on his arm. You're the best doctor she could have right now, Liam. A low whine rose from Rusty, who looked up at them with his soulful brown eyes, as if he understood the gravity of their conversation. Margaret knelt down, stroking his fur. I think she needs us all, don't you, Rusty? Just then, Detective Mei Chun reappeared, a thoughtful look on her face as she approached. I've just spoken to hospital security, she began, glancing between Margaret and Dr. Reeves. There's something strange you should know. Margaret's brow furrowed. Strange? Chun nodded, her tone cautious. There's been a report of a young couple seen in the area earlier tonight, near where the baby was found. A witness claims they were acting suspiciously, looking over their shoulders, as if they were hiding something. A chill crept down Margaret's spine. Do you think they could be connected to the baby? That's what we're trying to determine, Chun replied. We'll review any surveillance footage in the area, and I've put out an alert. If there's anyone connected to this child, we'll find them. Margaret exhaled slowly, glancing at Rusty. It's hard to imagine someone could just leave a child like that. Chen's gaze softened as she looked down at the dog. Hard to imagine, yes. But I'm glad she found you, Rusty. Maybe fate has its way of sending us exactly who we need. Hours later, Margaret found herself back in the NICU, her fingers pressed against the glass as she watched the baby sleep in her incubator. A wave of emotions washed over her. The helplessness of seeing the infant so tiny and vulnerable, but also a fierce protectiveness she hadn't felt in years. She glanced down at Rusty, who sat faithfully by her side. You know, old friend, she murmured, you're part of this now. She needs us both. As Margaret stood there, a nurse approached, her expression sympathetic. We've decided to call her Hope, just for now, until we learn her real name. She's fighting hard. Margaret's throat tightened. Hope, she echoed, testing the name on her lips. That sounds right. Dr. Reeves joined them, his expression serious, but with a glint of determination in his eyes. Margaret will start the surgery in a few hours. It'll be a difficult road, but I believe she has a fighting chance. Margaret nodded, determination filling her gaze. Then I'll be right here. She won't go through this alone. As dawn broke, the NICU's quiet was shattered by the arrival of Gerald Hawkins, the head of the local animal control unit. Dressed in his regulation uniform, he strode down the hospital corridor with a steely look in his eye, his gaze landing immediately on Rusty. Days slipped by in a haze of vigilance and quiet hope, and as the leaves outside turned from green to fiery shades of autumn, little Hope steadily grew stronger. Every day, Margaret and Rusty made their way to the NICU, Margaret bringing a quiet but determined strength to her new role as Hope's guardian, while Rusty never left her side, as though he had sworn a solemn vow to protect this tiny life he had saved. The hospital staff had grown used to the unusual sight of Margaret and her canine companion visiting the baby each day. In fact, Rusty's heroism had sparked a wave of affection from everyone at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Nurses would slip him treats, and doctors would stop to give him a pat on the head, as if somehow his presence made their work feel a little lighter. One morning, as Margaret sat by Hope's bedside, humming softly to calm the baby, Detective Mei Chun entered the NICU, her face a blend of determination and caution. Margaret sensed that Chun had news, something she had been dreading but knew was inevitable. Margaret, Chun began, pulling up a chair beside her. I've just come from speaking with the young couple. It turns out they're not Hope's biological parents. They admitted to finding her but panicked and abandoned her, thinking they'd be implicated for some reason. They aren't the child's family. A strange sense of relief washed over Margaret. She hadn't wanted to think that Hope's parents had willingly abandoned her. But as the relief faded, she realized this meant Hope's true origins remained a mystery. So, there's still no family for her? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she gently stroked the baby's cheek. Chun shook her head. No family has come forward. Legally, Hope is now a ward of the state. But I wanted to talk to you about something, Margaret. You've been here for her every single day. I've never seen anything like it. I thought maybe you'd consider fostering her yourself. Margaret's heart skipped a beat, her mind spinning with the possibilities. The thought of taking Hope home, of raising her, seemed almost too beautiful to hope for. She looked down at Rusty, who seemed to share her thoughts, his warm brown eyes meeting hers with what felt like quiet encouragement. Me? She asked, her voice wavering with disbelief. Could I really do that? Chun smiled, nodding. Absolutely. You'd need to file the paperwork, of course, and go through the process, but with your background and your devotion to this child, I think you're the perfect candidate. Margaret's hand shook as she reached for Chin's. Thank you, Detective. I can't tell you what this means to me. Chun patted her hand gently. The truth is, Margaret, we couldn't have done any of this without you, and without Rusty here. She knelt down, giving Rusty a warm scratch behind the ears. You're quite the team. Later that afternoon, Margaret found herself sitting in Dr. Reeves's office, her heart pounding as she shared her decision with him. Liam listened intently, a soft smile on his face as she explained her wish to foster and eventually adopt Hope. Are you sure about this, Margaret? Dr. Reeves asked, though his voice held no hint of doubt. Taking on a baby is a big responsibility, especially one with Hope's health needs. Margaret looked down at her hands, her mind drifting back to the many hours spent at Hope's bedside. She felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her, stronger than anything she had felt in years. I've never been more sure of anything, Liam. Hope deserves a loving home. And Rusty and I, well, we've already become her family. Dr. Reeves smiled, reaching across the desk to give her hand a reassuring squeeze. Then I'll support you every step of the way, Margaret. You're going to be an incredible mother. Margaret's heart swelled with gratitude, a wave of emotions overtaking her. Thank you, Liam, for everything. A week later, after countless forms, home inspections, and a final health checkup, the day arrived for Margaret to bring Hope home. She had spent hours preparing her little cottage, transforming her cozy spare room into a nursery with a crib, soft blankets, and a mobile that chimed softly in the morning light. Rusty watched her work, his eyes following her every move as though he sensed the importance of this day. The hospital staff gathered to say goodbye, each nurse and doctor stopping by to offer their best wishes and leave small gifts for the baby. Margaret held Hope close, her heart brimming with gratitude for the love this little girl had already inspired. Dr. Reeves gave Margaret a warm hug, his gaze drifting down to the baby nestled against her shoulder. Take good care of her, Margaret. And remember, you're never alone in this. We're all here to support you. With a final round of farewells, Margaret stepped out into the crisp autumn air, Rusty trotting beside her as they made their way to the car. She carefully placed Hope in the car seat, watching as Rusty sat beside her, his head resting on the edge of the seat, his eyes watchful and gentle. As they drove home, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in years, she felt as though her life had found a new purpose, a sense of direction that filled her with hope and joy. When they arrived at the cottage, Margaret carried Hope inside, with Rusty close at her side. She brought the baby into the nursery, settling her into the crib and watching as her tiny fingers curled around the edge of a soft blanket. Rusty patted over, his head tilted as he peered into the crib, his tail wagging gently. Margaret smiled, placing a hand on his head. She's part of our family now, Rusty, she whispered. We're going to take care of her, just like you did that night. The baby let out a soft coo, her tiny face peaceful as she drifted off to sleep. Margaret and Rusty sat together by the crib, their hearts full as they watched over her, a quiet sense of purpose binding them together in a way she could never have anticipated. That night, as Margaret sat by the fire with Hope sleeping soundly in her crib, there was a knock on the door. She rose, curious and slightly apprehensive, wondering who could be visiting at such a late hour. Opening the door, she found Detective Chin standing there, holding a small envelope in her hand. Margaret, Chin said, her tone cautious. I thought you want to see this. Margaret's eyes fell on the envelope, a strange feeling knotting in her stomach as she took it. "What is it?" Chin glanced down at Rusty, who had come to stand protectively beside her, his eyes trained on the detective. "It's something we found. During our investigation, we located a letter near the site where Hope was left. I thought it might give you some answers." Margaret's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope, pulling out a piece of paper with handwriting scrawled in a rushed, uneven script. Her eyes scanned the words, her heart clenching as she read. "To whomever finds her, please take care of my daughter. I don't have the means to give her the life she deserves. I hope that someone will love her as much as I do, even if I can't be there." Margaret felt tears well in her eyes as she folded the letter, holding it close to her heart. The letter left her with more questions than answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Hope had been loved, even in her brief time with her birth mother. She looked up at Chun, who placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're giving Hope everything her mother wanted for her, Margaret. I thought you want to know." Margaret nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, May. Thank you for bringing this to me." After Detective Chin left, Margaret sat by Hope's crib, the letter clutched in her hand. Rusty settled beside her, his warmth a comfort in the quiet room. As she gazed down at Hope's sleeping face, Margaret whispered softly, "You were loved from the start, little one. And now, you're loved here too." Rusty lifted his head, his gaze meeting Margaret's, and she felt a sense of unity, a silent promise that they would protect Hope with everything they had. For the first time, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. She was not just caring for Hope. She was fulfilling a wish, honoring the sacrifice of a mother she had never met. And with Rusty by her side, she knew she was ready to give Hope a life filled with love, safety, and a family that would never let her go. "Mrs. Thorne," he began, his voice hard, "I've come to collect the dog. We can't have strays running loose in the hospital. He needs to come with me." Margaret's face tightened, and she instinctively placed a protective hand on Rusty's collar. "Rusty isn't just any stray, Mr. Hawkins. He saved a baby's life last night. He has every right to be here." Hawkins crossed his arms, unyielding. "Rules are rules, Mrs. Thorne. I'm afraid I have to follow protocol. Stray dogs, especially in a medical facility, are a liability." Dr. Reeves approached, his voice firm as he intervened. "Mr. Hawkins, this dog has done more for this hospital than any rule or regulation. We're in a unique situation here, and Rusty is staying, at least until the baby he saved is out of danger." Hawkins's mouth opened as if to argue, but he glanced around, noticing the nurses and staff gathered nearby, their expressions a mix of defiance and admiration for Rusty. Realizing he was outnumbered, he finally relented with a begrudging nod. "Fine," he grumbled, glancing at Margaret. "But don't expect me to turn a blind eye if he causes any problems." Margaret gave Rusty a reassuring pat as Hawkins stormed off, feeling a swell of relief. "You're safe with us, Rusty. No one's taking you away." As the hospital day wore on, whispers of the heroic stray dog who had saved a baby spread through the halls. Staff and patients alike came to catch a glimpse of Rusty, their faces lighting up with admiration as they approached him. One by one, they thanked him, some offering treats, others simply giving him a scratch behind the ears. Rusty accepted each gesture with quiet dignity, his gaze never straying far from Margaret or the NICU. Around midday, Dr. Reeves returned, his face serious as he approached Margaret. "We've scheduled the surgery for this afternoon. It's going to be challenging, but I'm ready to do everything I can." Margaret reached for his hand, giving it a supportive squeeze. "We're all rooting for you, Liam. Hope couldn't be in better hands." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Detective Chin entered, her expression a mix of relief and intrigue. "We've identified the couple," she announced, her tone urgent. "They're a pair of recent high school graduates from the next town over. I think we may have a lead." Margaret's heart raced. "So, they might be the parents?" Chin nodded. "Possibly, though we haven't confirmed anything yet. They're coming in for questioning this afternoon. If they're involved, we'll need to get to the bottom of why they left her, and fast." As she spoke, Margaret's mind raced with questions. Why would two young people abandon a newborn? What had led them to such a desperate act? She glanced down at Rusty, who seemed to sense the tension in the room, pressing closer to her leg for comfort. In the late afternoon, as the hospital settled into a hushed tension, Dr. Reeves and his surgical team prepared to operate on Hope. Margaret stood by, her hand resting on Rusty's head as she watched through the observation window. She felt a pang of helplessness, but also a fierce sense of hope. A hope that somehow, this tiny life would find her way through. As the surgical team wheeled Hope into the operating room, Rusty let out a soft whimper, his eyes never leaving the infant's small, fragile form. Margaret bent down, wrapping her arms around him. "She'll be all right, Rusty. Dr. Reeves will take good care of her." The hours dragged by, each one stretching longer than the last. Margaret paced the waiting room, her gaze flicking from the NICU doors to the clock on the wall, counting each passing minute. Rusty followed her every step, his head resting against her knee whenever she stopped, offering his quiet support. Finally, as the first signs of evening crept over the hospital, Dr. Reeves emerged from the operating room, his face weary but triumphant. He met Margaret's eyes, and a slow smile broke across his face. "She pulled through, Margaret," he announced. "The surgery was successful. She'll need time to recover, but she's going to be all right." Margaret's heart swelled with relief, tears springing to her eyes. She knelt beside Rusty, wrapping her arms around him as a sense of overwhelming gratitude filled her. "You hear that, Rusty? She made it." Dr. Reeves knelt down, patting Rusty's head. "We couldn't have done this without you, old friend." Margaret looked down at Rusty, her heart full of pride and love. "It seems you were meant to be your guardian, Rusty. You found her, you saved her, and now she has a chance." Rusty gazed up at Margaret, his eyes warm with understanding, as if he knew that his journey and hopes had only just begun. The weeks turned into months, and as the first snow dusted the streets of Oakbrook, Margaret's little family settled into a rhythm, their days filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet joy of new beginnings. Hope grew stronger every day, her tiny hands reaching out to explore the world around her, her laughter brightening every corner of the cottage. And through it all, Rusty remained a faithful guardian, his gentle presence a constant source of comfort and companionship. Margaret couldn't imagine life without Rusty. He had been with them every step of the way, a steadfast friend and protector, his loyalty to Hope unwavering. As spring approached, Margaret noticed the toll the years had taken on Rusty. His steps were slower, his naps longer. But his spirit remained strong, his heart as bound to theirs as ever. One sunny afternoon, Margaret received a letter from the Oakbrook City Council. Curiously, she opened it, her eyes widening as she read the contents. The city had officially recognized Rusty as a local hero, and in honor of his courage, they planned to host a small ceremony in his name. "Rusty," Margaret whispered, her voice filled with pride, "they're going to honor you, old friend. They're finally recognizing what we've known all along. You're a hero." On the day of the ceremony, friends and neighbors gathered at Oakbrook Community Park, the very place where Rusty had first found Hope. Margaret held Hope in her arms as she stood beside Rusty, his fur brushed to a golden shine, a blue ribbon around his neck. The crowd cheered as the mayor presented him with an honorary medal, a golden paw print engraved with the words "Our Oakbrook Hero." Rusty's tail wagged as he looked up at Margaret, his brown eyes full of love and contentment. Margaret knelt down, her hand resting gently on his head. "You've given us more than we could ever repay, Rusty," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing us together." As time passed, Margaret decided it was time to adopt another companion to keep Rusty company and bring more joy to their growing family. She visited the local shelter and found a young, spirited Labrador mix named Daisy, her eyes bright with curiosity and playfulness. Margaret knew Rusty had slowed down, but she hoped that Daisy's youthful energy would bring a renewed spark to his life. When Margaret introduced Daisy to Rusty, he greeted her with a curious sniff and a gentle wag of his tail. Daisy, in her boundless enthusiasm, nuzzled up to him, her energy contagious. Soon, they were padding around the yard together, Rusty showing her the best spots to nap in the sunshine, and Daisy playfully tugging at his ear. Margaret laughed, watching them bond, her heart full as she realized her family had grown yet again. Hope adored Daisy from the start, her laughter filling the cottage as Daisy playfully nudged her with a wet nose or licked her tiny fingers. And as the seasons changed, Margaret often found Hope cuddled between Rusty and Daisy, her two protectors always by her side. Years passed, and Margaret's family continued to grow in love and joy. Rusty's steps grew slower still, and his fur turned a little grayer, but he remained a gentle presence in their lives, his heart as faithful as ever. One morning, as he lay in his favorite spot by the fireplace, Margaret sat beside him, stroking his fur as the sun cast warm rays through the window. Rusty looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, and Margaret felt a swell of gratitude that words couldn't express. He had given her everything, a family, a purpose, and a bond she would treasure forever. When Rusty passed peacefully that winter, surrounded by Margaret, Hope, and Daisy, they mourned him deeply but celebrated his life with love. He had been a hero, a friend, and the heart of their family. Margaret had a small memorial stone placed under the oak tree in the yard, engraved with his name and a simple phrase, "Rusty, our guardian angel." Hope would often sit by the stone, talking softly to her guardian dog and telling him about her day. And as she grew older, she would tell stories of how a brave dog named Rusty had found her and brought her to a family who loved her more than words could say. The cottage remained a place of laughter and warmth, filled with memories of Rusty's love and loyalty. And every night, as Margaret tucked Hope into bed, she felt a quiet presence watching over them, a guardian spirit forever entwined with theirs. In the end, Rusty's story became the foundation of their family, a tale of love, courage, and the